What up? It's Praveen, aka Braille, and you're checking out Braille Sounds. And today we're gonna talk about 6 things that I wish I knew when I first started making music. And I'm saving the best for last, so stick around. I've been making music for decades at this point. Very quietly, but I've got almost 50 releases out on a ton of different labels, worked under a bunch of different aliases ever since my first album in 2004. I've written first as Praveen, my real name, then worked with my friend Tom as Praveen Benoit. He goes under Benoit Poulard. And then more recently, I've worked with my friend Heather Pearls as Pleasure Jail, and of course with my friend Travis as Sepalcure. And if you do know me from my music, you probably know me from that project. It was definitely my most successful. I was even lucky enough to have some of my music placed in Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan. You can barely hear it. It's filtered out during the club bathroom scene. We got knocked out of the main club scene by Chemical Brothers, but it's in there. Ever since I started Sepalcure, I also have been releasing music as Braille. First house music and a bunch of dance-focused 12s, and more recently gotten into this modular stuff. Been able to tour around the States and the world, and also I've failed quite a bit and made a lot of mistakes, and that's why I'm making this video. Ever since I moved back to Brooklyn, I've been super inspired to write and create again. I've learned quite a bit that I put off or was too lazy, honestly, to learn, and I've learned it from YouTube like a lot of us do these days. I figured like now is the time to get back, and I hope that some of you out there can maybe find some inspiration from these videos or just feel a little bit less alone. That's kind of the whole goal here. So let's get started. Number 1, don't be lazy. And this can mean a bunch of different things, but for me, especially early on in my career, it meant learn your tools. I spent so much time creating freely, and I did not take the time to learn a lot of the tools that I was using on a daily basis. Things like just proper compression for a variety of different things, not just side chaining and all that. Or even proper gain staging. You know, a lot of the times, a lot of my recordings on my early releases are not great. There's a lot of noise or a lot of elements and artifacts that shouldn't be in there. I wish I took more time to learn those things, especially when it comes to the mix, because I had the excuse that, oh, my music's lo-fi or whatever, or it's just raw. But in reality, it just sounded like shit. Honestly, a lot of those early releases just don't sound that great in a properly tuned club, which is a huge shame. So learn your tools. It's gonna help, especially if you're targeting like specific sound systems or venues or environments. Make sure you try your music in those environments as well. Also be thorough in your production. Go through your songs before you export them and cut out the clicks and the artifacts that may have popped in during recording and clean up the tracks. Take that time and the result is gonna be a whole lot more satisfying to you, but also to your audience. Number 2, nothing is sacred. This one took me way too long to learn. Again, especially when I first started, I thought that everything that I was creating was meant to be, and I felt really strongly that I had this process that embraced improvisation. So when I would record something in, it was there, and I would end up polishing a turd for hours instead of just taking out that recording or replacing it with something better, or even just going in a totally different direction or chopping it up. Nowadays, when I start the song, I know very well that everything I'm laying down is expendable. I might start with those filtered chords and bass that you know I love, but honestly, if those chords don't work, they're gonna go by the end of the track. The thing is that it gets me started. So it's fine to do things quickly and to embrace improvisation. Just understand that everything that comes out of that improvisation doesn't need to stay in the song. Another thing about nothing is sacred that I think is super important is to not export your music too soon. The longer that you have something you've exported that just sits there in a demo form or an early version, the harder it will be going forward to diverge from that original version. I take a lot of elements from my work outside of music, which is prototyping, and try and apply them to writing music. And specifically in prototyping, your goal is to explore as many options as possible, to try and find the answer through exploration, and to move on quickly if things aren't working. And I find that having that mindset when I sit down to write or arrange or produce is super helpful and lets me keep it moving and not get stuck on elements that really don't need to stay in the song. Number 3, consistency matters. And this might not apply to you depending on what your musical goals are, but for me, this means two things. First, in terms of your own music, stylistic changes that are pretty drastic can end up alienating your audience, and you might lose some fans that otherwise may have stuck it through and stuck with you to the end. This happened to me. I went from releasing a bunch of dance-focused 12 inches to a pretty emotional concept album, Mute Swan, my first album, where the majority of percussion was me banging on cardboard boxes from a really traumatic move. And I'm really proud of that album. I do not regret releasing it at all. It's some of my best work, but I just wish I would have released it in a more strategic fashion. I think a lot of people who are following me from the electronic music and dance world seem to be a bit disappointed that I wasn't just releasing some heady dance bangers or whatever. Another way that consistency matters, for me at least, is in this attention economy world that we live in today. It's a bummer that we even need to operate this way, but through the experience of releasing my latest album, Triple Transit, I've learned quite a bit about what works and doesn't work as an artist online in 2024. I'm not saying I have some crazy numbers or viral success stories, but what I have noticed is moving from my previous approach of a single Instagram post and disappearing for another 6 months to actually posting very consistently and trying to build a sort of community and connection with the audience has actually resulted in quite a few people sticking around to actually listen to the music, and in some ways that's one of my goals. And in this world where there's so much noise and the signal to noise ratio is just out of control, unfortunately, being consistent online and constantly reminding people that you exist is pretty important. The art form there is to do that in a way that isn't annoying. Honestly, I'm still struggling with that. It's one of the reasons I started the YouTube channel. This is something where I feel like I can give back without just a lot of short form fluff posts. Try and find a way that you can provide value to your audience in between your releases and give them a little glimpse at who you really are, what your process is, and what you're up to. Number 4, mental health matters. And this one, I really wish I had learned earlier in my career. Look, touring and performing is hard, no matter who you are, but for people like me who are actually pretty introverted and don't like being the center of attention, I know that sounds hypocritical from someone who's literally talking into a camera and putting this video on YouTube. There's a big disconnect here between me and the audience. And when you're performing on stage, you're right there with them. And that would fill me with quite a bit of anxiety for a variety of reasons, like a lot of reasons I think we all deal with when we're creating and putting it out there to the world. That feeling of imposter syndrome, that anxiety about how the audience is going to receive your music. You know, it's a very personal side of you in some cases. So that fear can be debilitating. And it led me, in my case, when I was on tour, either as Braille or Sepalcure, to try and cover that up either through drinking or just ignoring my feelings or putting on this persona and sort of mask that just hid me from myself in a way. And honestly, I wish I would have just taken the time to give myself the time and space to understand more clearly what I was really going through and how I could deal with it in a more healthy way. It would have saved me a lot of messed up relationships and connections that I missed because I just wasn't in a headspace to make them. If you are trying to make music a sustainable and long-term career, it's critical that you approach it with the idea that this is a profession. This is a business. This isn't your journey as a rock star, which is sort of how I felt throughout the majority of my touring days. It's really important to remind ourselves that we shouldn't beat ourselves up when we aren't feeling super productive or we're not able to do some of the things that we think we should be doing. Assess yourself before you start being creative. See where you are mentally and what you're up for and what you think you can actually achieve. And if you don't think you can achieve anything and you don't feel like even creating, maybe you need to give yourself that space and that time. Music will be there when you go back. It's way better than getting burnt out or discouraged or beating yourself up because the results aren't great. You want to be coming into the studio and being excited about the act of creating and hopefully the act of finding joy in that creation. It's not always going to be that way, especially if music is your career and you have actual deliverables, either for scoring or for remixes or releases or whatever. You may not be in a headspace to create and you have to. And in those cases, yeah, sometimes you do need to sit down and just do the work. But when you're able to, make sure you give yourself the space. Don't beat yourself up. If you're even sitting down to try and be creative in your studio or your laptop or wherever you create, give yourself a pat on the back like you're way ahead of the curve. Number 5. don't take it personally. And this is another one early on in my career that I really messed up. I used to take it so personally when labels would not respond, or my peers or my friends wouldn't actually respond when I sent them tracks. In both cases, I thought it was something personal, or they just hated the music and I needed to reconsider my entire creative goals. And that just simply is not the case. In most cases, people are just busy, and especially these days, there's so much music out there. It is impossible for everyone to keep up. Labels are just getting swamped with demos, and they just don't have the time to respond to everyone. And your friends are busy too. I mean, look around. We're living in a pretty crazy world these days. Sometimes it's hard to sit down and take the time to listen and give constructive feedback to your friends. Whenever you feel like you're being slighted, or someone isn't responding, or you're not getting this shine that you think you should, or whatever, just don't take it personal, especially with reviews. And I know it's really hard not to read reviews. I am very guilty. I read them all, even though I tell myself I shouldn't. There's some negative reviews that still stick with me. It's something that I still struggle with, is to remind myself, like, that's not personal. Music is subjective. It's not objective. So people are entitled to their opinion of whatever it is you're creating. The important bit is, are you finding joy in creating it? And are you finding joy in releasing it to the world and having people hear it? Well, if so, then nothing else matters. Number 6, the process is as important as the result. And I've said this a few times in a lot of my videos, but what I mean by that is, I used to get so concerned with what the final result was going to be and how it would sound and what it would mean to the world or the label or the audience, that I just wouldn't have fun making it. And I lost that sense of joy, and really it was replaced with a sense of dread every time I would sit down at the laptop and look at Ableton and see a blank screen and think to myself, well, what am I supposed to make? And that was the wrong question. And the question you should be asking yourself is, what do I want to make? What's gonna bring me joy? And this can be, like I've said multiple times, just setting up your creative environment in a way that removes friction, but also enables you to move really quickly from your origin point. And that origin point can vary depending on what your process is, and it can vary release to release, session to session, song to song. I like to break that up into maybe 6-month periods or big release periods where I have a system set up around how I want to start that music. Right now, like you know, I start most of my songs with the filtered chords of bass that you know I love, and I built my entire system around that so that I can start there and move really quickly out to feeding those notes to melodies and bass and whatever else, and getting the drums going really quick. And your process might be starting at the piano, and if that's the case, set up your environment so that you know you can sit down and get rolling really quick and not have to worry about miking up that piano every time. The goal really is to find the joy in creating, and I lost that for quite a while, and it was really, really sad. I've gained it again. Honestly, a lot of the reason I started this YouTube is to try and help anyone out there who is struggling with finding that joy in creating again, to find it in their own way. There's nothing I'm doing which is the right way, and I want people to understand that when I give advice or my perspective on things, that there's no world where I think that I have any of the real answers. I do have a perspective from quite a bit of time doing this that I hope will inspire or help some of you feel less alone when you're creating. So let me know down in the comments some things that you wish you knew when you were just getting started, or even some things that you just learned recently that you think have been helpful in the act of creation. I want this to be a place where we can share these ideas and hopefully inspire each other and keep making music. So until next time, thanks for watching.